All right. Ready? All right. We are now going to begin the afternoon session. I was told I said good morning earlier, of the Fair Political Practices Commission in San Jose. And thank you very much to the Clerk of the Board of Supervisors, Lynn Regadance, Colin Cuch, who helped us make sure that we got all of our tech accomplished, and Mindy Sanchez for all of her assistance. Madam, could you please do the roll?
Commissioner Kasher?
Here.
Commissioner Escovitz?
Here.
Commissioner Wasserman?
Here.
Commissioner Wynn?
Here.
Chair Ravel?
Here. Thank you very much all for your patience. There are a couple of housekeeping matters that I would like to announce. One is there will not be a commission meeting in July, but the next commission meeting is scheduled for August 22nd at 10 o'clock in the FPPC hearing room in Sacramento. A couple of things that have transpired for the benefit of the commissioners since the previous meeting. We had last week a meeting with local ethics commission directors and their staff, at the meeting were the Los Angeles Ethics Commission Director, San Francisco Ethics Commission Director, and a lot of their enforcement people and others, Oakland, as well as Oakland, to discuss issues of mutual concern related to both political issues and ethics issues and how we could collaborate in the future. And this was the first such meeting ever, they told us, in the history of the commission. And it was a very productive meeting. They had some very good ideas. And we talked a lot about collaborating on issues in particular relating to disclosure and giving more information to the public about political campaigns and ethics issues statewide, and we all have that mutual interest. And I want to thank Linda Cassidy and Dominique Ward for all of their work, as well as the other staff members for making presentations. It was really a very productive day. We are still working on some legislation, and we will talk about that potentially during the legislative portion, but we are looking at some legislation to enable us to have online filing of Form 700s, which we now do not have. And we're hoping we're also working on getting a system up and running, at least in a beta test, potentially, for next year's filing time period. So that is something that the staff has been working very hard on, and there's urgency because of the time constraints, and we think it'll be a great benefit not only to the people who have to file, but also to the public to get information. And I think, and I also wanted to mention, thank you very much to the Executive Director Search Committee that is here with me for all your work in interviewing candidates. I interviewed all of the candidates for the Executive Director search this week and have some ideas, but we are going to, we are going to set a special personnel closed session so that we can have a discussion about the candidates and make a decision at that point. And I don't know, have we scheduled that? Okay, the closed session will be July 5th, and for the public, it starts at 10 a.m. For the public, the location of the call will be the Los Gatos Town Council. And so if there's any members of the public that will want to come and speak in advance of the closed session, that's the location. So with that, Now is the time for public comment, and this is for any item that is not on the agenda. If there's an item on the agenda that you wish to speak to, you of course will have an opportunity to do so then. Sir. Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you. Welcome to the Bay Area. I live in Alameda. My name is Leland Trayman, and I'm here because if you mention the Fair Political Practices Commission to most Californians, they certainly will think that it's a group, an organization that helps protect them from large moneyed interests in political campaigns doing illegal things. And certainly on a statewide level, that may be so. I don't know. I don't have experience there. But on a local level, the Fair Political Practices Commission unfortunately does the opposite. It assists large moneyed interests in depriving citizens or attempting to deprive citizens of their right of free speech. And I have some internal memos from the Fair Political Practice Commission that supports that. As an illustration, in the city of Alameda, we had a school parcel tax on the ballot in a special election in March of 2011. The people in favor of the school parcel tax raised about $150,000. Alameda is a city of 75,000 residents, 41,000 registered voters, and they raised $150,000. There were 3 or 4 different small committees, mostly individuals, who spent money against this parcel tax because they thought it was, well, I was one of them. I thought it was unfair, given the fact that small businesses and residences paid 32 cents per square foot, while our large shopping center in town paid 1 penny per square foot. And the Raiders' corporate headquarters is located in Alameda. They were paying 8 cents per square foot. Anyway, because of that, we were justifiably angry. And these aggregate, all these small committees together, I don't think spent $5,000. Nonetheless, going after some of the individuals in these small committees, lawyers from the Yes on A committee filed complaints about robocalls with the Fair Political Practices Commission to go after individuals who spent several $100s of their own money to do their own robocalls for this. And they were harassed. I was one of them. I was harassed. I had an inspector, quote unquote, calling me on my cell phone, my home phone. My kids were picking up the line sometimes, on my business phone. And the memo inside about this says the complainant believes he recognizes the voices on the calls, and this and the law about robocalls does not apply to calls made by volunteers for the committee. Nonetheless, they opened up a case because they.
Can I ask for clarification?
Yes.
The phone calls came from inspectors from the FPPC. Is that what you suggest? Okay.
Yes.
Thanks.
The harassing phone calls came from Beatrice Moore of the FPPC.
Okay.
And boy, was she annoying. Now, during this campaign, the school district itself spent public monies to get this parcel tax passed. And we know because they did it before in a previous election 10 months earlier, which they lost. On a June election, they spent $14,000 for a newsletter that didn't go to the parents of children in the district. And I will say that my children were going to public schools, and I would have gotten it as a parent. No, they sent not to every resident of the city of Alameda, but only to registered voters. This pattern was repeated for the March 2011 election, when they again sent out a newsletter predicting dire straits for the district if Measure A didn't pass. The first time around, the school district got a letter of warning saying that, yes, this was inflammatory language, but it didn't rise to the level of an offense. But when we discovered their pattern of sending out these newsletters only seemed to happen just before a parcel tax election for the school district, we again informed the commission and wanted the case reopened. And the pattern became very clear during the second election when they did exactly the same thing, despite the warning from this commission not to do it. And I have another memo here of someone suggesting that, aha, we should reopen this case. And the same person who wanted to go fishing on people who spent, I personally spent $1,000 of my own money on those robocalls, wanted to go fishing to find something to get us. That they were looking for the sperm on the dress is what they were looking for. It really angered us. But that same person wrote, sorry, not interested in reopening. We'll discuss it if you like, with his or her initials. Now, this is grossly unfair, and if you think that I am just an anti-tax activist, you're absolutely wrong. I mean, I happen to be the person in 1980 who thought of the concept of square footage taxing for the city of Berkeley. I wrote the Library Relief Act of 1980 and have always supported local taxes, but not local taxes that were unfair and that were that contravened state law as Measure A does. In any case, I think that obviously you can't do anything this time, but you should put something on your next agenda about how inspectors go about responding to complaints. A complaint written by an attorney for a well-heeled campaign against the little guy should be looked at with a jaundiced eye. And when we complain about government spending our tax dollars for political campaigns, that should be followed much more vigorously. So your people are being used to shut the little guy up.
Thank you for your comments, sir. And as you know, we cannot respond.
Right.
But I will ask my assistant, the commission assistant.
Copies of this.
Thank you.
One last thing. This was posted on the website Action Alameda News.
Okay.
Not a website that I run, somebody else runs. And some people from Southern California had a similar experience. They contacted us, and their first question was, how can we sue the FPPC for harassment? They wanted a class action suit. Now, obviously, that's over the top and ridiculous. I mean, that's not something I would get involved with. But that's how angry us little people are at the local level at the actions of your employees.
Okay, thank you for your comments. And feel free to give me a call and give me specifics.
Yes.
And I will look into it.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anybody else in the audience that would like to speak on an item not on the agenda? Okay. The first item, we first have the proposed consent item, and I know there are a number of people who want to take a couple of these items off the agenda. But I would suggest, why don't we first start with item number 2, which is just approval of the commission meeting minutes. Is there a motion?
I move to approve the minutes.
Second.
Commissioner Kasher,
Yes.
Commissioner Eskovitz,
Yes.
Commissioner Wasserman,
Yes.
Commissioner Wynn,
Yes.
Chair Ravel.
Yes. All right. For the remaining items, item 3 through 18, is there a commissioner that would like to remove any of these items from the consent?
Yes, I would like to remove items 3, 4, and 16 from the consent calendar.
And are those for the purpose of discussion or for the purpose of a separate vote?
Just for the purpose of a separate vote, I would like to recuse myself from voting on those.
Okay.
Your Honor, I also was requesting 3 and 4, but I did want to have some discussion.
For discussion.
This is Gavin Wasserman.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Wasserman. Anybody else that would like to remove an item from the consent calendar? All right, so why don't we take a vote then on items 5 through, what's the end? 5 through 18, removing item 16. Is there a motion with regard to those?
Yes, I would like to move items 5 through 18, with the exception of item 16.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Wasserman.
Commissioner Kasher,
Yes.
Commissioner Eskovitz,
Yes.
Commissioner Wasserman,
Yes, and I wasn't the second, actually. Yeah, it was Sean Eskovitz, second.
Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Eskovitz.
Commissioner Wynn,
Aye.
Chair Ravel.
Yes. Thank you. All right, so we are now to item number 3, which is in the matter of Daniel Chun, which is a money laundering enforcement matter. Commissioner Wasserman, did you have a question?
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you. I had 2 things I wanted to say about number 3, and it has to do with one of my interests about educating ethnic communities regarding issues like contribution laundering. I note that in both 3 and 4, there are statements by the respondents that they didn't know what they were doing was wrong. I have encountered this stated lack of understanding before in various communities. I am multi-ethnic myself, and I just had a suggestion, which is not substantive to the decision, but that a cost-effective method of educating those folks who honestly do not know that this is a problem, and also educating those who do know but think that we do not enforce, is to use the ethnic media. There are still many folks, in particularly I know in various Asian American communities, whose most trusted news source is their native language daily newspaper. For example, down here in the San Gabriel Valley, there are a number of folks who the Chinese language newspaper is gospel for them. To have coverage of this through press releases would be helpful in educating in a manner that is, like I said, much more cost effective than symposiums and other workshops, because it reaches the general public. I note also that there's a case that came up recently in LA City in the Korean community with a similar sort of problem. And like I said, this would reach both those who honestly don't understand that their urge towards privacy contravenes law, and those who are actually attempting to knowingly circumvent. That's just a suggestion I have, which is irrespective of and with no animus towards respondents in these matters. I recommend that this agency direct information on these types of cases to appropriate ethnic media. And it doesn't really matter whether the respondents in any particular money laundering case happen to be of that ethnic group. I think it's more important that the subject, they're more likely to run the story if it is, but that the information would be helpful to get out there. That was the first thing I just wanted to articulate. The second is I'm going to abstain from a vote because both of these matters involve contributions to a candidate named Wasserman. While no allegation of any violation of law has been made against that recipient, I would like the record to reflect that, to the best of my knowledge, recipient Wasserman is in no way related to me. But
thank you, Commissioner Wasserman. We didn't think so. Are there any other comments by other commissioners relating to this?
Well, I would just second that thought. I do think, to the extent that we can do outreach into really every community, but especially ethnic communities, that aren't, reading the main newspapers that cover the FPPC. I would like to encourage the staff. I know we're in the process of hiring a staff person to do just this, and I just hope that we would give them some direction to look at the ethnic media.
Right. I also think it's a really good idea, and I appreciate you raising it, Commissioner Wasserman, and I wonder whether I could enlist you in assisting if we have a new staff person on board who is going to be working on these issues, if you could work with them to be able to contact the ethnic media and give information about these issues, because it makes a lot of sense. Do you have a comment, Mr. Winnick?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Gary Winnick, Chief of the Enforcement Division. We're obviously 1,000,000% in support of the education and the outreach and the enforcement. I guess the only fact I'll throw in for this specific cases is the contributions were made in the amount, all of them in the amount of $500, which just happened to also be the contribution limit for the local government race in question. In our mind, that helped increase the penalty for us, because I think it proved knowledge on their part, at least, of some of the rules that they were trying to circumvent. But
thank you. Yes, clearly we take these matters very seriously, because it deprives the public of the rightful information about who's behind campaigns, but it's important. So with that, I know, are you actually recusing yourself, Commissioner Wasserman?
I don't think it rises to the level of recusal, but I'm just going to abstain from the actual vote, because if I were truly recusing myself, I wouldn't discuss this at all.
Okay. Is there a motion?
I'd like to move items 3 and 4.
Is there a second?
Sean Eskovitz, I'll second.
Commissioner Kasher, recused. Commissioner Eskovitz,
Yes.
Commissioner Wasserman,
Abstain.
Commissioner Wynn,
Aye.
Chair Ravel.
Yes. Thank you. Okay, our next item is item 16, and that is in the matter of Raymond J. Nutting, and this is a statement of economic interest non-reporting matter. Is there comment from?
I'd be willing to move the staff recommendation.
Is there a second? No second? I'll second it. Would you like to speak to this, Mr. Winnick?
not unless there are questions to the members,
Okay.
Madam Chair.
Okay. Is there anybody in the audience that would like to speak to this issue, this matter? Okay.
Okay. Commissioner Eskovitz?
Yes.
Commissioner Wasserman?
Yes.
Commissioner Wynn?
Yes.
Chair Ravel?
Yes. Okay. The next item is discussion of draft regulation 18421 relating to specific reporting of when someone is paying a committee, or pays a person or group to create online content. Heather Rowan, Senior Commission Counsel.
Good afternoon, Chair Ravel and Commissioners. Heather Rowan, Commission Counsel. Before you today for discussion and comment is Regulation 18421.5, which aims to provide the public with greater disclosure regarding its online information consumption. The regulation is not up for a vote today.
Can you hear?
Proposed Regulation 18421.5 will require committees to specifically report payments made to provide favorable or not working? Is that better? Okay. Specifically reporting payments made to provide favorable or unfavorable content or commentary of the candidate or ballot measure. An exception to the campaign's reporting applies if the campaign's own staff is producing and publishing the content. Without this regulation, some payments may be disclosed or may not be apparent given the limitations of the Form 460. The regulation requires that a committee report to whom the payment is made, the amount, the person who provides the service, and the internet location where the communication appears in the first instance. We've had several comments come in to help clarify the regulation, which will incorporate, several of them came in yesterday, so we look forward to further discussing and clarifying the language in the regulation. Several comments were regarding definitions in the regulation, including content and providing. And we do agree that to the extent that we can nail down definitions on these terms, the more specific the regulation will be. And then the other comment was regarding the language that we're using in terms of either favorable or unfavorable support versus supporting or opposing candidates or committees. And we do agree that the given parlance in the statutes tends to be supporting or opposing, and we'll incorporate those changes as well. There were comments regarding the exception for in-house campaign staff, whereas the question was whether we can identify in-house versus contract persons who are providing content, and why there's an exception there. During the interested persons meetings last fall, we had a lot of treasurers make suggestions about the language that we had at that time, which has since been changed, discussing the impossibility and questionable necessity of reporting your own staff providing content, because depending on, of course, how we define content, it could be the reporting could be lost in a lot of minute details, which is why we made this this exception and this delineation. And additionally, there's an exemption for communications that the campaigns put on their own webpage. The obviousness of where that comes from, we thought we would leave alone. Consumer Watchdog, telephone with support, but it does not yet have written comments. They'd like to participate in the August meeting and requested that I mention that. And we look forward to discussing this further. Questions from the commission or the public will certainly help us nail down the language.
Thank you, Ms. Rowan. Are there questions from the commissioners? Anybody on the phone have a question?
It's Sean Eskovitz. So I think I understood what you just said about the in-house campaign staff issue. Is there some sort of definition or explanation for who's envisioned to be in-house campaign staff?
Yeah, right now there's not there's not a definition, and that was one of the suggestions, is that we do define that. And I think that speaking with treasurers might help define that. The comments that came in asked the difference between in-house campaign staff and someone that the campaign contracts with to provide content for internet sites. And it seems to me that if you're contracting with someone, you're not in-house staff, but we're happy to kind of open up that discussion. It's a good point about making sure that we have that defined, so that's not kind of a squishy standard there.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Madam Chair, this is Gavin Wasserman. I have two questions.
Commissioner Wasserman?
Hello. I have a question regarding subsection E, which appears to have an exclusion for payments to a person for producing content solely for the committee's own websites or social media accounts.
Yes.
How that fits in with subsection B, which I guess sounds like it would cover the same thing.
I'm not sure I followed that question. Are you saying?
Maybe what is the purpose of that exception in E, and how does that play out?
In E, the idea is that when a campaign is publishing on its own website, the website is already stamped with where the campaign controls it, and the campaign is already disclosing not necessarily that it's producing a website, but that it has a staff of people that provide its own PR. If that's would be separate from having someone publish on a website that's not related to the campaign, that doesn't have stamped all over it City Council Joe Smith all over the website with a copyright for that campaign with that committee. So the separation would be, we make an assumption that people going to joesmith.com or not .gov .com would know what they're actually consuming.
Okay, so I think where my question came out of was in B1, where it talks about providing content for a website, whether one's own or another's. The one's own referred to is the content provider, not the committee.
I see. Yes. Right.
That's why. Okay, so that might just be an item for clarification.
Okay, I see what you mean. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I was just curious as to B3, creating video content to be posted online. I see it's providing content for posting, and then providing content for posting on a social media site. And then the third is, instead of where it's being posted, what type of content. Is that particularly because that is the most prevalent use type of content currently?
I think that might be better explained once we define content.
All right.
And we intend to have further discussions about how to explain those finer points.
Okay. And my last question has to do with C, and it asks for the name of the website or the URL on which the communications are published in the first instance. So it's a first publishing, so if they put it on their blog first, that's what is reported. And if they put it somewhere else thereafter, that's not reported?
Yeah, so what we're trying to do there is show that the content that the person who controls the content posts it on his or her blog, for example, and then any other place that it shows up, whether through various social media sites or anyone else passing it on, or a news story picking it up and quoting back to that particular blog. The campaign shouldn't be responsible for what happens to information on the internet, because it's so easily passed along. So what we want to see is the sites that person or that campaign is actually has control over.
So you don't really mean in the first instance of publication, but each time the actual creator publishes it, rather than any sort of viral aspects of once the data is out there.
Yes. Yes, and that's a good point. I'll take a look at, make sure that we clarify that point as well.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comments by commissioners? Is there anybody in the audience that would like to speak to this item?
Hey, Ravel, it's Sean.
Oh, sorry.
Right, following on that discussion on subsection C, and I realize you're in the process and working on tightening up the language, but the preparatory clause there about including as much specificity as possible, including, seems to me to be, the term used earlier, pretty squishy. And I think if we can be more specific about the reporting obligation rather than leaving in this general language about as much specificity as possible, I'd be much more comfortable with the language.
Yeah, that's a good point. Actually, the Enforcement Division also commented on that, and they requested that we tighten up that language so it's actually enforceable. So enforcement's suggestion was to have a list of what we mean when we say specificity.
I agree with that.
Okay. Thanks.
Any other comments from commissioners? Anybody in the audience that wishes to speak to this item? Sir. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Thank you very much for having me in San Jose. My name is Daniel Play. I'm the new media director for Consumer Watchdog, so it's nice that you guys are in my neck of the woods and not having for us to travel somewhere else. First and foremost, we just wanted to thank the Commission and their staff for their time and energy in putting together this new regulation to help further open up the books on the electoral process. I do have one or a couple clarification questions and a request to follow. First, the question. Say a campaign hired an outside consultant, and that consultant's company had 20 people working for it. And each of those employees spent part of their days working for the campaign, posting online, not specifically on the campaign website. Not specifically on the campaign website, but on other outside things not currently covered by the exceptions. Would the disclosure then be filed under, we paid this campaign consultant X amount of money for online communications, and then leaving the burden upon the voters or the citizens to have to figure out which people work for which company? Or would it say, we paid this company who then paid these people as staff members to post online? As a broader sense, sort of how does that type of situation work under these new regulations? And then finally, I don't know if you guys want to respond now or I can keep going.
Would you like to respond?
Sure. I think I talked to one of your colleagues about this issue. I think that the regulation certainly intends to pick up the most specific disclosure possible. And when you have a bulk payment made to a consultant that doesn't really show where the online presence is created, I think this regulation intends to fill in those gaps so we get more specific disclosure, so we see where the consultants are actually participating online if it's a bulk payment. And reading this, I've had several people read it with that in mind, and I do think that it's included. And I after speaking with your colleague yesterday, I thought that maybe we could take a closer look and make sure that specifically that consulting reporting really is captured in the regulation, because it seems like that was where some of the complaints came from, was those payments get lost.
Yeah. Online media kind of just has this broad, when you fill out forms, online media can be whatever. So that'd be great if more specific. And then
Thank you. That's helpful.
I have one more statement that my colleague, I'm sure, who you spoke to, wanted me to pass along, which is we do think this is a very strong step in the right direction to open up the books. But we urge the Commission and staff to consider how to make these disclosures more relevant for the average voter who doesn't really know the FPPC exists, or doesn't know that you can go to Cal Access and read millions and millions of pages of disclosure forms, which I'm sure many of us have lost many hours doing. So perhaps there's an easier way to get the average voter educated on this, perhaps even just saying, because you guys may be already saying you have to disclose the first time or the first website that you post on, simple as just saying, if you're paid by the campaign as an outside consultant, add an editor's note, or just say, you don't have to put the amount of money, just say, editor's note, I'm a paid consultant on this campaign. Something as simple as that, as the average person can consume the data without having to search for it, which I believe is the goal of this committee, to make sure that, money in politics is as open and as accessible as possible.
If I could just say, that is certainly, just speaking for myself, the ultimate goal. But this is a first step, and we're going to see how it works.
Yeah, and we thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else in the audience that would like to speak to this item?
Madam Chair, there's not anyone in the audience. The speaker's suggestions have stirred something in my head that I wanted to share.
Excuse me? I'm sorry, I missed what you said. Is this Commissioner Wasserman?
Yes, this is Gavin Wasserman. If there are not further speakers...
There's one further speaker, I believe, but you can go first.
Oh, okay.
He's happy to stand at the podium. It's Philip Ung. Go ahead, Commissioner.
Based on what the previous speaker had mentioned, in subsection C, it says the name of the person providing services. I suppose that could be the name of the person or persons to clarify that you're actually trying to get whoever is providing the services. The second thing I wanted to just consider is the name of the website or the URL are two very different things, really. I mean, the website could be something.com. If we're talking about a specific URL, we can talk about a specific page or specific posting. Just a thought. And the third thing is, if you're dealing with folks who are posting content on any number of sites, they aren't necessarily posting using their full name. For example, a person might not post as Gavin W. They might post as Freedom Lover or something like that. So to the extent that we're dealing with trying to connect a dot between a statement, which is truly a paid-for statement, and the records that show that something's been paid for, I'm not at the point to make a suggestion as to how to resolve that, but there will be a disconnect between reporting payment to Gavin W. and it went on the website, a website about some local issue or whatnot, and then then you go through the post and you find no Gavin W. You find all sorts of other pseudonyms. So I don't know if requiring the account name or the handle is appropriate or necessary, but it's a thought to think about in terms of how this would be practically useful to the public.
Thank you for the input. Mr. Ung.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioners. I want to also thank the staff. It sounds like our letter from Common Cause was helpful in guiding this process. That was definitely our goal. And I also want to apologize for the record of why I'm dressed in a T-shirt and jeans. I'm actually in town for a convention, so that's why I was able to attend this hearing. So it was a great coincidence, and it's not at all just me being relaxed. And actually, I came up because staff didn't mention the issue of online identities, which we had mentioned in our letter, but it sounds like Commissioner Wasserman had brought it up, and so I thank him for that. I would also, we didn't mention it in our letter because we thought we would really keep this one focused on the pending regulation, but we would concur with the speaker from Consumer Watchdog about really looking at consumer side disclosure. And also, we've mentioned it in interested person meetings, but really look at the model that the Federal Trade Commission has designed. They actually just released new guidance, federal guidance, in March of this year that really spells out what they're asking folks to do as it relates to paid advertising or sponsored social media campaigns. And their guidance has actually been implemented since March, and we're seeing it online right now with tweets having the word ad or hashtag sponsor or anything like that, and the same thing with Facebook and blogs. And so we should review that process in hopes of just hopping on to the FTC's already established guidelines and not create our own and cause confusion online. I also do appreciate staff and the commission tackling something in hopes of regulating the internet, which is somewhat it's impossible to almost regulate. But I think this is a big challenge, and we commend you for it, and we're here to help in whatever way we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ung. Just for the information of the Commission and the public, the FTC's guidance is just that. It's not, they do not have enforcement over that guidance. So, we certainly have looked at that, and that is a model, and it's an important model to provide information to the public. But as I indicated, we're going to go in smaller steps, at least initially. Is there anybody else in the public that would like to speak to this item? Okay. This is merely a report and a discussion, and we are going to be looking at this once again at the August meeting. So thank you all, and we hope you come and participate at the August meeting. All right. The next item is item 20. and that is a discussion of issues relating to material financial effect on real property. And there's thank you, Ms. Rowan, thank you. And the presentation will be by Bill Lenkite, who is Senior Commission Counsel. Mr. Lenkite.
Thank you, Chair Ravel. It's got to be kind of close to it, yeah. I don't know how to get that up. Good afternoon, Chair Revel and Commissioners.
Just 2 seconds,
If I could
Commissioner
just
Wynn.
interrupt you for a moment before you get
Sure.
started. I don't often read 18-page memos and enjoy them as much as I enjoyed this one. It's only 16. You know, it was a really great history of this rule and really kind of highlights how difficult it is to get some of these things right, even when you have the right motivation. So just as a new commissioner, I thank you very much for this, you know, really kind of laying everything out and how many tweaks have occurred along the way. I don't think it's going to be easy to fix it, but I did really think that you gave us all a great background in where we ought to be heading. So thank you for that.
Thank you, and it will only get more difficult from here.
Yes. 16 pages on material effect of real property is particularly problematic, but because you are so humorous, it's excellent.
Thank you. 40 years ago, between April and July 1973, attorneys in the Secretary of State's office, which had recently been transformed from its routine role of elections overseers to an advocate for election reform, prepared language for what was to become a ballot measure, the Political Reform Initiative of 1974. Within months, the initiative had qualified for the ballot. In June 1974, it was overwhelmingly passed by the California electorate, receiving 69.8% of the vote. The initiative, which established the Political Reform Act and the Fair Political Practices Commission to administer the act, sought in the wake of the Watergate scandal to reform the political process from elections campaign to the duties of public office. It was the most comprehensive political reform package since the adoption of the initiative, referendum, and recall process into the California Constitution in 1911. One of those reforms was to establish rules addressing conflicts between an official's private interest and public duties. Most of the attention concerning the initiative revolved around the need for transparency in elections and governmental actions by requiring disclosure, including campaign contributions for candidates and ballot measures, and financial interests of governmental decision makers and those who ran for certain elective offices. Less attention was focused on the actual mechanics of what would constitute a conflict of interest for a public official based on his or her financial interests. Those details were left for the Commission to decide when implementing its regulations to carry out the purposes of the Act. After almost 40 years of working to accomplish this task, those details are what we return to today. At the time the Act was passed, no one would have reasonably argued that the Act would prevent a public official from making a decision to fix potholes if he or she had a pothole within a certain distance of his or her home. Yet the last time the Commission took up this issue, that is exactly what the city attorneys indicated would be their advice, based on our regulations. No one would expect that we would prevent a public official from voting on a decision to authorize covers over city bus benches or to upgrade the elevators at City Hall because the official owned a home within 500 feet of a bus stop or within 500 feet of City Hall. Yet that is what we have advised. At the same time, no one would have expected us to develop a system that resulted in public funds being used to hire real estate appraisers to make the determination as to whether or not an official had a conflict of interest under the Political Reform Act, while we sat on our hands and said, we can't tell if you do or you don't. Finally, no one would have expected us to draw a line at 500 feet for all real property decisions and say, Inside that line, you have a conflict of interest. Outside that line, you don't. Staff memo outlines the attempts we have made at addressing what constitutes a material financial effect on real property. The last time the Commission addressed this issue, it struggled with finding an appropriate result after determining that the previous system was fatally flawed and needed to be replaced. In the end, it adopted the proposal advocated by the city attorneys to draw a line, any line, that would establish a bright line test that made the call pretty much automatic. Their reasoning was that the main factor in determining a financial effect on an official's real property is the proximity of the property that is the subject of the decision, and that by drawing a line, most situations can be addressed by a simple, easily applied method. Staff believes we can do better. While there is some merit to the argument, the proper method is overly myopic, and that the present method is overly myopic, and that the purposes of the act are not being fulfilled, requiring us to take another look to see if we can develop a better approach. Primarily, we believe that not every decision that involves a location is necessarily a real property decision, that all real property decisions are not created equal, and that we need to at least give some minimal consideration and analysis to evaluate the nature of the decision before making our determination. There are some decisions that are just too important to be decided by the flip of a coin or the length of a tape. With that, at the Commission's pleasure, I've got, we can take questions, or I can go into the PowerPoint, which will show some of the real property decisions that we have been asked to address in advice letters over the years.
What's the desire? You want to go with the, okay.
Right to the show? Okay. This first property is located in Irvine, California, and of the 10 properties that I'm going to show you, this is the only business property. The official owned a $1,000 or more interest in this office building located on Alton Parkway in Irvine. And this mouth is a little sensitive. The property there is on the top circle of the second slide. I guess I'm going to have to, we're moving to the second slide now for those of you on the phone. The property, the office building, is located in the top circle on Alton Parkway, just down from Jamboree Road. Alton Parkway and Jamboree Road is a major intersection in Irvine. Jamboree Road up to the northeast becomes a freeway, and a few blocks after this, the San Diego Freeway runs under the bottom of the picture. The Costa Mesa Freeway runs to the left of the picture. Alton is an off-ramp from the Costa Mesa Freeway. Jamboree Road is an off-ramp from the San Diego Freeway. So this is a pretty heavily traveled area, and it's in the Irvine Business Complex. The picture, the circle at the bottom of the picture is the subject property in the decision, and the consideration at the time was there was a vacant property at that time. The consideration was to put in an 87-unit apartment building. The distance between the two properties is about 1,500 feet as the crow flies. And moving on to the next one, the way to get there if you're walking or driving, it's just under a mile as the dog trots. So one is an office building, one is a proposed apartment building. At the time, the rule was anything between 300 feet and 2,500 feet would have to show a $10,000 material effect. So the official in the city went out and hired an appraiser to determine whether putting in an apartment building over on McGaw Avenue, a mile driving distance away from an office building on Alton Parkway in the middle of the Irvine Business Complex, would increase or decrease the value of the office building by $10,000. The appraiser put in a lot of time, and I would guess it was at great expense to the city. The appraiser examined appraisal reports when the city first developed the properties in the business district. The appraiser interviewed planning commission officials, looked at various reports, looked at various zoning laws, and prepared an 8-page narrative report that basically said that because the official's property is a building, is an office building, its highest and best use was an office building, and therefore if there was any impact on the office building from an apartment building, it was imperceptible. And they submitted all of this to us and asked for an answer, and we told them, we're not the finder of fact. You may participate if it's reasonable to rely on this appraisal. The next property is Laguna Niguel. The first slide or picture will show you basically the red balloon is where the official's property is located, was located. The area down, this is on a bluff overlooking South Laguna Beach. You can see the Pacific Ocean on the bottom left of the picture. The homes in this area ranged from about $300,000 to $1 million at the time, and this was in 1995. $300,000 would get you a condo. I would imagine that the $1 million would be the larger homes with ocean views. This was a home with an ocean view, 7,000 square foot custom home. The decision, moving on to the next slide, involved property at the bottom, the big large circle at the bottom of the page, and the decision was to put in a 22-lot subdivision with, on a 22-acre parcel, some with ocean view homes. So the decision was to create ocean view lots for custom homes in the same neighborhood where the official owned a custom home with an ocean view lot. To determine whether there was a conflict of interest, we went to the same within 300 to 2,500 feet, $10,000 rule, and 3 appraisers weighed in on this decision. One appraiser said it will have no effect. One appraiser said it may go down. The other appraiser said it may go up. To measure a $10,000 effect on $1 million home is almost impossible. 10% of $1 million is 1%. Appraisers can't deal in those kind of numbers. So the task that we set out for them to begin with was impossible. It got worse. When the appraisals were submitted, one of the appraisers made the mistake of saying, this is not a full appraisal, this is a letter of opinion. The 2 others were basically the same thing. They were all appraisals. Appraisal is any determination of value. All of them were indicating an opinion of value. So they were all appraisals. But not knowing the difference, our office told the city attorney that the appraisal was no good because it was not a full appraisal. It was only a letter of opinion. So that was our first mistake. The second mistake was we relied on, well, to rely on any of the appraisals would have been useless, but we picked one and relied on it because that appraiser mentioned the magic words reasonably foreseeable and material effect of $10,000, where the other appraiser, who gave far more information, didn't use those magic words. So because the one appraiser used those words, we deemed that as the most reliable and comprehensive of the reports, and his conclusion was that there would be no effect. And we actually told them that based on the appraisal, the reasonably foreseeable effects on the official's property are not material, and allowed the official to vote on this property. Okay, the next property, this last 2 slides show, still from the Laguna Niguel property, the official's home. The property is to the south, under the area that says Badlands Park in the middle. And there is the property that was a subject of the decision. You can see that there is development now on that property. There are some vacant homes. There are some lots still available with ocean views. Okay, the next one, we're moving south down to San Diego County, and this is a property in Solana Beach. The red balloon with the A in it is where the official's property is located. You can see Highway 101 on the left side of the picture and the San Diego Freeway on the far right side. The property that was the subject of the decision is just above where that red balloon is, where you see all those white structures. Going in a little bit closer to the next picture, you can see that those structures now are storage units. At the time of the decision, the property was zoned light industrial, and there was nothing really on the property. So since then, this development has occurred since then. We'll go into the next picture, and we'll show you that the bottom circle, the large red circle, shows the official's backyard right around the edge of the property line. The top circle shows the back of the property line for the from what is now the storage units. The distance between the property lines was less than 300 feet, so the materiality standard for property under 300 feet distance was 1 penny. So it was presumed to be a financial effect on the property unless you could rebut the presumption of 1 penny. The appraiser actually did a pretty good job of telling what the situation is and the kind of things that they look at. The decision was to rezone from light industrial to residential to apartment buildings. So they were going to try and put apartment buildings in this area. So their decision was just a rezoning decision. The appraiser did a pretty good job of telling what the issues were, that generally something like this would not have a measurable effect on the official's property unless it was something major to, put in something that would cause the value of the property to go down, but putting in multifamily residential in a residential neighborhood in an area like this where the property was far enough away from the official, and far enough away, here you say it's 300 feet. Oops. If you go back to the last picture, you can see that the access to the official's home was by an entirely different route than the access would have been to the apartment building or to the storage unit. So there was no increase in traffic in the neighborhood. There was no increase in noise in the neighborhood. The view, we'll go back to the previous picture with the, shows the backyard. Where the apartments were going to go, or where the storage units are now, is on a hill overlooking the house. So there was no hindrance of the view of the property or any other effects on the property. So the appraiser said because of the low impact of this change, there is no measurable effect on the property. Now, when appraisers talk in terms of measurable effects, they're talking in terms of something that they would make an adjustment for when they're doing their property. So something that would show up on a sales price, or something that you'd get a benefit that would result on a higher price. They don't talk in terms of 1 penny. This appraiser did not address the 1 penny rule. Most of the appraisals we get in do not address the 1 penny rule. They just tell you what they know and that there would be no measurable effect. One thing I guess I should point out, for full disclosure purposes, before I started working with the Fair Political Practices Commission 11 years ago, I spent 5 years with the Office of Real Estate Appraisers, where I was the chief prosecutor, prosecuting appraisers for licensing violations for preparing deceptive appraisals. So I'm not an appraiser, but I have a little bit of a background and kind of know what to look at when I see these things. Okay, so the next property is in Oxnard in Ventura County. And this one is kind of interesting. Go to the first slide. The balloon with the A in it shows where the subject of the property, the decision, and that's at the corner of West Gonzales Road and North Patterson Road. The subject of the decision was to put in a, 320-acre project that included a golf course, a clubhouse, residence, churches, and parks. So it was a fairly big decision. The next picture just zooms in a little bit. It shows that, again, where the A is, that's the subject of the decision. The property has now been developed. Thurgood Marshall Elementary School is at the corner of West Gonzales Road and North Patterson Road, and there are houses and part of a golf course above that. We'll move on to the next picture. And this shows you where the officials' homes were located. In the neighborhood immediately across the street from this proposed development on the east side of North Patterson Road. The circle on the far left is one official who was located 97 feet from the proposed development. And the second official's house was located just to the right of that at 470 feet. And the third official is the circle on the far right middle of the screen, located at 2,200 feet. The interesting part of this is this again was under 300 foot of the donut rule, 300 to 2,500 feet, and then 2,500 feet beyond, you're okay. So all of these, one person came within the 300 feet, the two others were in the 300 to 2,500 feet range. The interesting thing about this is it shows you clearly what kind of developments can go in and why distances are not that important. Under current rule, we would have the 500-foot rule. Two of these people would be in and could not vote, and one would be okay. Yet they all live in the same neighborhood. And if you look at that middle circle, that would be probably the last house within that 500 feet rule. The guy that lives next door, if he were an official, he could vote, but this official couldn't. So that's important. Sure. Okay. All right, I guess we're going to cut to what is my favorite one. I guess we're getting hungry. That's a good one, but let me just go to one, show up one penny roll. This is in Dana Point. There are the official's property is located at the A in the red balloon. There are two parks here. One is Dana Crest Park, which is, let me go down a little. This is just to show you there are the two parks, and there is a pedestrian walkway that goes from Sea Canyon Park, which is about in the middle of the page, that goes all the way down to the beach at the left end. Okay, you see here both the parks. The top park, which is not marked, is Dana Crest Park. The one at the bottom of the page is Sea Canyon Park. The official's home is on Armanda Drive, about in the middle of the screen. The circle shows the subject of the property decision. This decision was the city was having a problem with people cutting through various properties to get to the top park. The decision was to purchase land from both of those property owners and put in a pedestrian walkway so that people would have access to the park from the south end. The appraiser said that based on the traffic patterns, people would not be walking down Armanda Drive, would be coming down Barbados Drive or up Tesoro Street to cut through that area, and that the official received no benefit because the official's property was served by Sea Canyon Park. So I guess the rule is that two parks are not better than one, and he or she would always use Sea Canyon Park and never have any reason to go to use one where it says Hops and Bloom Team, the Dana Crest Park. This one is a good example. There's the distance between the official's home and the subject of the decision, which was less than 500 feet, which was the rule at the time. This is one of the first decisions we made, letters that we issued after we made the 500-foot rule. The 500-foot rule was supposed to prohibit any decision within 500 feet unless it could be rebutted. So they got an appraiser to try and rebut it. So here's the thing I want you to look at. Imagine you're buying that house on Armanda Drive, and you're told when you move in that the park for your area is down south of you. But there's also another park up there, and there's a pedestrian parkway to get to that park, but it has a locked gate on it. And to access that park, you need to have a key to get through that locked gate, and that will cost you 1 penny more. So the question is, would the typical buyer pay 1 penny to get a key to that gate to be able to use both parks? The answer seems that it would be obviously yes. But we went through this whole process, got an appraiser who did his magic wand, said there's no traffic, there's no people walking down, it's not going to spoil your view, and you're not getting any additional benefits. Therefore, there's no financial effect. And we said, okay, you're okay. So we come up with a 500-foot 1 penny rule that's supposed to be an absolute determination, and then right away we start poking holes in it and allowing people to get out of the whole conflict thing that was supposed to be a sure thing by hiring an appraiser to say that there is no effect. And that's where we are today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Linkheit. Are there any questions by the commissioners? Mr. Casher.
No questions. I just want to thank you for the presentation. That was excellent and very informative. Thanks.
Thank you.
Commissioner Wynn.
Yeah, again, Bill, thanks very much. So I think at the end of the memo, you basically said, I'm teeing this up, and I'm hoping to get some direction as we begin to, try to figure out how to reformulate this rule so that it makes sense. On page 15, when you start talking about moving toward a simple standard that considers a reasonable person and furthers the, goals of the act. So I don't know. I mean, I agree with you. As you kind of wound down the memo, you made a number of kind of recommendations on things we ought to be looking at. And all I would say is, I think they're reasonable. It's a reasonable plan. And, I'd like to encourage you to go ahead and pursue that. The donut rule and the 8-step and they have not served us particularly well. So if we could try to come up with a reasonable person, and you talked a little bit about the perception. So not only can you try to quantify, but would a reasonable person think that there was no conflict? We should try to keep that in mind also.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Casher.
Yeah, I just had one question on page 15, where you give some guidance and some suggested language there for what the reasonable person standard might be. It's described as how a reasonable person would perceive that the official will see a personal benefit. And I was wondering, the change in verbiage, personal versus a financial benefit, was there any kind of issue around that?
I think that really is the main issue. Every time we've tried to quantify this in terms of a financial benefit and put a number on it, it hasn't worked, and it just never will work. There's no way you can put a number on something like this, what the number is going to be on a dollar amount benefit on a real property issue. And every time we've tried to go down that road, we've run into trouble. We've got to get away from that.
Okay. And then just as a follow-up question, is there a way to provide some guidelines as to what staff would consider a personal benefit beyond the advice letters? I don't know if that's something that's even possible, but.
Yeah, I don't know if the words personal benefit are the exact words that I would use as I got into that, but just whether it provided an advantage, a convenience, something like that made the house, gave you an advantage that you didn't have before, or over other people that were unique to your area, something along those roads. There's a new road that provides you access to greater shopping, greater restaurants, that kind of thing. Is that a benefit that we would consider if you're trying to decide where to put this road, whether it's by your neighborhood or somebody else's neighborhood? If you're trying to decide whether to extend the light rail out to a half a mile from your home or to extend it in another direction around somebody else's home, that's something that's more than 500 feet, but you're going to get a benefit if you have the extension comes near your house rather than someone else's house. There's lots of things like that I think we need to look at.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, Zach Morzini, the General Counsel. I just wanted to add to that. Bill did a fantastic job here. What we're trying to go after is those things that would tug at your duties to the public, and that a reasonable person would see as pulling you away from that trust that the public has instilled in you as an official. So it might be difficult to define, but we're gonna get started in trying to do that. So hopefully we'll bring some really good language back in August, I think. September on that.
Just as a final comment, I like the reasonable person standard. Maybe I have my attorney hat on, but I think it works. But I also want to be mindful of the fact that if you are, for someone who's advising on this, as an attorney, we have case law and we have things that we could reference to help interpret that standard. And when we don't have something, it'll be evolving, obviously, but if we could provide the regulated community some guidance as to what we mean by that, I think it will just help them as far as compliance. But I like the standard. I think it works.
Okay.
Yeah, Sean Escovitz, I wanted to second that. I think, just as this demonstration shows, the examples are really helpful in terms of making the principles concrete, and the more, illustrations that we can provide, both in terms of articulating the standard and then in terms of applying it, the better. That's my heavy preference if we're going in the direction of something like a reasonable person standard.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other commissioners?
Chair?
Yes,
This is Gavin Wasserman.
Commissioner.
Two things, if I may. That's maybe three, yeah. Thank you for bundling decades of various people's frustration into one memo. And I also appreciate the backup of the prior memorandums of folks trying to address this. That was also helpful. I guess one of the things that I want to try to keep in mind as we go forward on this is whatever standard we determine, whether we'll be able to then give meaningful guidance, rather than, I think what was pointed out was, well, if it's reasonable to rely on this appraisal, then go ahead. Then the question would be whether or not we'd be issuing letters that say, well, if a reasonable person would think this isn't a problem, then go ahead. But as just sort of on the front end, not being able to give meaningful guidance. That's my first thought on that.
Let me just address that thought, if I may. One thing that I want to absolutely stay away from is ever putting us into the position where we have to judge an appraisal. We're just not qualified to do that. And the one thing that I learned at the Office of Real Estate Appraisers was if you have a number, you can find an appraiser to hit it.
Right.
And there, it was generally, if you wanted your $250,000 home to be worth $500,000, you didn't have to do anything to the property. You just had to get an appraiser to say that it was worth $500,000, and the bank would give you the money. Here, I found the opposite effect, that appraisers can go in the opposite direction and hit a target that's not even visible to the naked eye, and say that the property, the decision won't even have a 1 penny effect. So you're always going to be able to find an appraiser to tell you what you want to be told.
And the other big challenge that I see in all of the advice letters, et cetera, with any of our regulations is, are we getting enough is enough information being provided so that one can make a determination?
I think one of the things that surprisingly enough really helps now that we couldn't do 10 years ago is what I just showed you here is Google Maps. Before we'd get the information in, we'd just have to go on what was in the description. Now the first thing we do is we put in the address and look at Google Maps. And in the last one that I was going to show you, it showed the appraiser said that there would be no effect of putting in a development with large homes right near the official's property. So we typed in the official's property, got the Google map, and saw where the development was and said, you got to be kidding. How can we be telling somebody that they can't vote on bus benches because they have a bus stop within 500 feet of their house, but they can vote on putting in a development 300 feet that looks like this? So it's easier to look at the property and get an idea. And on most of these things you can look at and say, all right, I can see what this does. I can see what the benefits are. I have a lot more interest. Picture tells 1,000 words, so that does help. But yeah, you are right. We're only getting the information that we are provided. A lot of the times we follow up and ask for more information to get things clear, but we don't want to go chasing down a rabbit hole on appraisals and the information that they provide.
So I guess going forward, one of the things to keep in mind, and I'm just talking I'm thinking out loud here, because I'm sure you're already thinking about this, is what is it that would make this better? How we make it better? And since you have these many examples of things that we could actually run through the lens of whatever new approach we're trying to see, we can actually say, hey, looking at these other cases, would this have made something that either would have been clearer, well, however we determine better, however we define that. So I look forward to this process.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions by commissioners? Is there anybody in the audience that would like to speak to this? Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon, Chair Ravel and commissioners. My name is Ren Noski. I'm the city attorney for the city of Santa Clara, California, and I'm a member of the League of California Cities City Attorney FPPC Committee. You have before you the June 14th, I hope you have before you the June 14th letter from our chair, Sean Mason, which exhibits really the consensus opinion amongst the 10 attorneys city attorneys on our FPPC committee, and that is we are, I think, averse to throwing that quantitative standard to the curb just yet. We think that 500-foot rule just simply works. It offers predictable results and ease of administration. Now, you may not be surprised that as attorneys yourself and the former county council, it's easy to give advice on the 500-foot standard. It's a bright line test. But in our experience, and certainly my experience in my 15 years as a city attorney, it's very accepted by elected officials. What typically happens in city attorneys' offices and in my office is we have a map with each elected officials' property interests with a circle around various properties that they own and each address that is affected by that 500-foot rule. If an item comes up on an agenda or some other governmental action that's going to affect that address, it's triggered on our program in our office, and it falls to me or someone else in my office to report that official. You have a 500-foot conflict. That is accepted by that official. In my 15 years, again, as a city attorney, I have not once had an elected official try to rebut the 1 cent rule. It just simply doesn't happen in my experience. I know that the 500-foot rule does lead to anomalous results. There's no question about it that there's some fairness issues, but quite simply, this rule works. And it can certainly be improved, but we do not want the quantitative standard set aside altogether. So that's all I wanted to communicate. Thank you very much.
Could I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
I mean, I understand that you want the predictability that comes from the number, But how would you deal, did your committee think about how you would deal with some of those, not just anomalous, but also, patently unfair and not, coming within the purposes of the act results? I mean, is there some other way that you can think of that would deal with your
any way to
predictability?
deal with that, you get into qualitative approaches, whether it's a reasonable person standard, which has been ably proffered by staff, or something else. And as is the case with so many regulations in the Political Reform Act, it is subject to differing interpretations, and there's no certainty there. And it can often, be quite a drag on governmental decisions when you have to step offline and offer guidance to that official. And as you know, we are not their personal counsel. They often seek our advice informally on these kinds of things, but when it drills down to that level, they usually have to consult their personal counsel at great expense to them, and it's a huge time lag. So I don't know what the answer is. We can certainly improve on the quantitative 500-foot rule. I think staff alluded to the line years ago, just draw a line, any line. Well, the line's been drawn, and it works, quite frankly, and that's where we're coming from.
I would just comment that I think it would be helpful if your committee, I mean, obviously, you are the ones who have to deal with this issue more than any of us, anybody else in the state. And so it would be helpful if you could, come up with, aside from saying just, draw the line there and be done with it, if you could think of potential ways, at least it would be helpful to
That's
me.
actually on our agenda at our next meeting,
right,
and we
great.
do plan to submit to the commission something in writing with our thoughts there. And if we could
Excellent.
consult with staff on that, that would be wonderful as well.
Yes.
And compliment you guys on your work. It was great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very
And
Really
I also
appreciate it.
wanted to point out that we're going to be doing an interested persons meeting within the next month or so, so we look forward to your participation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else in the audience that would like to speak to this issue? Okay, thank you very much, Bill, for a really good presentation and all your work on this issue. Our next item is item number 21, and it's adoption of proposed amendments to Regulation 18351, Conflict of Interest Code for the Fair Political Practices Commission. I don't know if there are any questions or concerns for Ms. Cassidy. Maybe there could be a motion, unless there's a question.
I'd like to move the staff recommendation on item 21, but I did understand that Linda wanted to make a comment.
This is Linda Cassidy. The Attorney General actually approves our code, and Ted Prim has asked that I change the words on the number 116, instead of using the words product, use the words equipment, lease space, materials, and supplies, which I'm going to recommend. So then I ask that you approve the amendment.
So my motion will reflect the amendments presented by staff.
All right, is there a second?
Second.
Commissioner Kasher,
Yes.
Commissioner Eskovitz,
Yes.
Commissioner Wasserman,
Yes.
Commissioner Wynn,
Yes.
Chair Ravel.
Yes. Thank you. And on the next item, which is item number 22, approval of amendments to Commission Form 806, which is Agency Report of Public Official Appointments. Are there any questions, comments, concerns? Is there a motion?
I move to adopt the form as presented by staff.
Thank you.
I'll second that.
Commissioner Kasher,
Yes.
Commissioner Eskovitz,
Yes.
Commissioner Wasserman,
Yes.
Commissioner Wynn,
Yes.
Chair Ravel.
Yes. Do you want to check back and see if
Commissioner Eskovitz,
okay, he may have stepped away.
I said yes. I don't know if I was heard.
Okay, thank you.
thank you.
All right.
We're ready? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Cassidy. Item number 23 is the Executive Director report and the other reports pending litigation from General Counsel and other. Would you like to speak or submit.
Pardon me, this is Zach Morzani. If there are questions, happy to answer them. Otherwise, the reports would be as submitted.
Any questions? Okay. Thank you very much. And do you have a question?
No.
Okay. So we will now move on to item number 23, legislative update. Ms. Brar, thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Ravel and Commissioners. Suki Brar, Legislative Coordinator. Good news, all of our sponsored bills and, is this on? Okay. All of our sponsored bills and the bills that the Commission has previously voted to support have passed out of their houses of origin and moved on to various policy committees in the next House. So today we wanted to discuss our recommendations.
Let me just say that is great news. That is great news. And excellent. Unique, unusual for the Commission's bills.
So today we wanted to discuss taking positions on 4 additional bills. These bills would include SB 2, SB 3, SB 26, and AB 1418. And so I'll go bill by bill, one bill at a time, and we can discuss each one. The first one is SB 2, and this bill would require disclosure statements by candidates on advertisements, additional information on slate mailers, and would also include audit authority for the Commission. And staff's, in my legislative report, we recommend support of this bill. We'd like to change that to support if amended. This is due to the audit authority language in the bill. While we support that, those provisions, we would like the bill to take the same language that we have in our audit provisions in AB 800. So other than that, we recommend a support position on this bill.
Hi, this is Zach Morzani again. So just to clarify, basically what we would like to do is see the a cut and paste of the AB 800 audit provisions, replace the audit provisions in SB 2, or dropped altogether from SB 2, just simply so there's no conflict, no conflicting standards going through. We were hoping that the legislature would have worked these amendments out themselves. They just haven't done so at this point, so we felt it was important to get the Commission to formally weigh in on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ung, would you like to speak to this matter?
I have a comment when he's finished. Okay. Yeah, thanks.
Since you brought it up, might as well. We have started conversations with Mr. Gordon's office to deal with and reconciling these 2 sections. So okay. we're in the process.
Great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Nguyen.
So, Mr. Ung, are you the sponsor of this bill?
Yes, we're a co-sponsor with the League of Women Voters.
Well,
yes.
the only thing that jumped out on me, which I was not sure that the FPPC should really be on the record in supporting, is in the write-up that we got from staff, and I did not read the bill, but that these audits would take priority over all other civil matters. So I think they bump things off the civil calendars in court.
Philip, I'm happy to address this. Yeah, that's exactly what it would do. Because it's such a time-sensitive writ of mandate nature for the Enforcement Division, we have that provision in our bill as well, okay. AB 800, just to ensure that Gary can get into court, or myself can get into court quickly and get resolution for in terms of access to records and so forth.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. If I could just add a comment to that, I want to also just second that point. I think I see that I did read the bill, and I see that it would be venued in the Sacramento Superior Court, and assuming that if this legislation passes, it would have that authority over the Sacramento Superior Court. We also know that there's significant budget cuts throughout the Superior Courts, and they're backlogged. So if in fact we can have that priority, I think it would be great, especially because this allows for these actions to be brought prior to an election. And I think it's important that we always balance the interest in transparency with not impacting the democratic process. So if we have swift decisions, I think that's really important. So for your ability to get into court, to have a resolution and a final decision is really important. Yeah.
This is Gary Winnick from Chief of Enforcement. We were fortunate enough in our litigation in the last election cycle to be given preference all the way up through the state Supreme Court. But it really has wound up being a law in motion section, much more so than sort of bumping a civil trial that's already planned.
This is Gavin Wasserman. So the writ of mandate is available to the person who is subject to the audit. So we attempt to do the audit, and they have the ability to get priority to seek relief and have resolution about this. Is that procedurally correct?
Commissioner, this is Gary Wink again. It actually would extend to both parties for us to enforce our audit authority or other provisions, and also for the respondents or the subjects of the audit. So it apply both ways.
You mean with as AB 800 as opposed to how it is in SB 2 currently?
Both of those bills would give both parties priority.
Are there any other questions? Anybody else in the audience? Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chair Ravel. My name is Gloria Chun-Hu. I'm the president of the League of Women Voters here in San Jose, Santa Clara. On behalf of the League, I want to, and my colleagues in San Jose and Santa Clara County, I want to thank very much, first of all, the Commission for taking its turn, for coming on the road and coming to visit with us. You can see we've had several League members who've been able to join in and to see the process, and this is wonderful. It's part of our transparency. I'm also here at the request of the State League. As you know, the State League has joined in as a co-sponsor of this legislation. We're very thrilled that the staff is urging support of it as well. We think this is an important step in the wake of items like Citizens United and the importance and the need for us to pass legislation for increased disclosure. And we think this bill goes a long ways in doing that. So we thank staff for its support, and we hope that and urge you to also support it. Again, I just want to express our great thanks for you being here in our part of the state. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there a motion with regard to this bill?
I move to adopt the staff recommendation to support the bill if amended as described by staff.
Is there a second? Okay.
Commissioner Casher?
Yes.
Commissioner Eskovitz? Commissioner Wasserman?
Yep.
Commissioner Wynn?
Yes.
Chair Ravel?
Yes.
Commissioner Eskovitz?
Yes, I said yes. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Ms. Brar.
Okay, moving on to SB 3. This bill would revise the terms late contribution, late independent expenditure, and in-kind contribution. It would increase fines for late campaign statements. It would also require the Secretary of State to complete a feasibility study for an electronic filing system by December 31st, 2014. And it would require the FPPC to develop treasurer training online certification for an online certification course for treasurers that are hired by committees that have cumulative contributions or expenditures of over $250,000. Staff recommends a neutral position on this bill.
Okay. Are there any questions by the commissioners with regard to this?
I wanted to first thank staff for including the fiscal impacts in all of this legislation. I think that was a comment that we had from the last meeting, and it's great to have that information included, so thank you for that. On this particular piece of legislation, I see that there's a fiscal impact of $137,960. Do we know if that would be absorbed completely by the FPPC, or would it be spread out between the FPPC and Secretary of State?
That is just the FPPC's cost.
Okay.
Are there any other questions or comments? Any commissioner on the phone has? Yeah. Okay. Yes. Audience, please. Mr. Ung.
Thank you, Chair Ravel and Commissioners. As our letter stated that we submitted to the Commission, the $250,000 is not something that we're married to. We're definitely, as far as the treasurer threshold, we definitely want that number lowered, but we want to be able to find a number that is agreeable to the commission as well, balancing, one, the burden on small committees, but also encompassing the committees that actually and the treasurers that need to be trained. As I mentioned in my letter, we've had previous conversations with the staff on this, and they were unable to opine on the specific policy recommendation, and they referred us to the whole commission to get that. And so I don't know if you want to go into a discussion about a specific number or direct staff to find that number, but we definitely do want to see that treasurer threshold lowered. We would also like you to actually support the bill, not just to remain neutral on it. We understand that there are costs associated with setting up the treasurer training, as well as making regulatory changes or form changes to the late independent expenditure, even regulatory changes, I believe, to the late designation. We think as far as the treasurer training goes, there are long-term savings in having to enforce less violations that could be saved from prevention. And so we think that the short-term costs are worth it in the end. This is not a recommendation, or this is not a provision, the treasurer training specifically is not a provision that we put in because we came up with it out of nowhere. It was actually came from a previous bill, AB 447, which was sponsored by the chairman's task force co-chairs at the time under Chairman Schnur. And so this was actually a recommendation from that task force. And so I just wanted to give some context on that standpoint.
Can I ask you a question about
Absolutely.
that? I mean, with regard to the certification course and treasurer training, I mean, have you or did the previous task force conduct any studies and have any data or information that would show that this would be a ultimate cost savings for the commission?
I don't have any data from that. I know when we spoke to people who had participated in the task force, they had said that the task force was so agreeable to treasurer training, that some treasurers out there, especially in the small local committees, needed some online accessible training to the complex campaign finance rules that we have in the state.
Right. But, I think the commission already does provide information and training to treasurers, I believe.
Madam Chair, this is
Mr.
Gary
Winnick.
Winnick, Chief of Enforcement. I actually participated in the task force when it was going on. It was done in a short time frame, and none of that particular data was considered in making that recommendation.
I'm sorry?
I participated in that task force. It was done in a short time frame, and none of the data that you're asking about was considered.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Wynn.
Certainly there are aspects of this bill that I like and think that the commission ought to be supporting, certainly the portions relating to late contributions. I'm a little bit concerned about, supporting a bill that the Secretary of State, gives the Secretary of State additional duties without the inclusion of funds. And also I'm concerned about giving the FPPC staff additional duties without including funds. However, if funds were included in the bill, I don't think it's a bad idea. We spend a considerable amount of time every single month dealing with mistakes that treasurers make. And to the extent that the legislature wanted to set some money aside to do that, I mean, I think that's great. But I would be, uncomfortable supporting a bill that has provisions that give us additional duties without, additional money.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can definitely address the FPPC appropriation point in our bill. If you would just let us know how much you would like appropriated, then we can definitely include that in the bill after having discussions with the author's office. As far as putting more fiscal pressures on the Secretary of State's office, this is actually, the portion of the feasibility study report is actually requested from the Secretary of State's office.
Okay.
And that funding comes from a special fund that we created last year through fees on lobbyists and campaign committees.
With that said, I would be comfortable doing with this bill what we did with the last bill, which is doing a support if amended, and really making sure that if the legislature wants to give us additional duties in terms of providing additional training, that they give us the resources. We would need to do it appropriately.
Hi, Madam Chair and Commissioner Zach Morzini, General Counsel. Yeah, it's definitely worth, it's it's a little bit late in the game. Fellow executive staff and I really haven't sat down and tried to come up with what would be how we could benefit treasurers through formal, required, statutorily mandated training, and which treasurers at what level, how to balance that burden with the cost on volunteer treasurers and committees who probably need the most training versus, you know, the fully informed, know the Political Reform Act better than most of us up here, treasurer training. So I'm not sure how we could amend the bill in a manner that, from a staff perspective, would make sense, unless it was maybe a 2-year bill, so it could give us time to formulate the training, because that would be a large impact on both the Technical Assistance Division, the Legal Division, and the Enforcement Division. I'm not saying that some training isn't warranted and wouldn't be helpful. It's just a matter of developing it and making sure we do it the right way, even assuming we have the appropriation with which to do it.
If I could just then follow up. So, Mr. Ung, I think Mr. Morosini makes a good point, and I'm wondering, rather than making your entire bill a 2-year bill, could we move the training provision out, spend a little bit more time, you know, trying to come up with the appropriate training and the appropriate costs associated with it? We'd be in a position to support your bill and, you know, put that one off for another day.
Ultimately, I am a sponsor, and so I will need to check with the author's office, as you all know. I think what Mr. Morosini has mentioned makes sense. You know, there are different approaches to this. We could always put a trigger in on the treasurer training, subject to the commission approving it, and then it would begin. We could push out the implementation of the treasurer training, and if the data isn't there, then we could always repeal that or sunset it. There are many other ways that we could do this, and those are the types of policy discussions we would like to have with the staff. As I mentioned earlier, they have told us that they would rather the commission opine on these policy statements. I do want to make one mention, and I'm showing a little bit of my frustration here, which was at the last meeting, I did mention that we came to the commission staff in January for feedback, in February and feedback for these bills. And we're happy that they're being taken up now, but to be told that it's a little late in the process and they need to be put off for 2 years is somewhat frustrating for sponsors to hear.
I totally, completely understand. I know the legislative process, but there are 3 brand new commission members that weren't appointed until April. So I understand the legislature started in January, but we had a new commission start in April, and we're now, you know, really, I know the staff was looking for direction from the commission. You know, I'm engaged, I'm interested in this, but it does feel fast, even though I know you have been working on it for a long time.
Okay. But we can definitely work on the treasurer training parts if that is what, if the motion is supportive amended, we can do that.
What I would suggest, I think there are some other issues with this. I don't believe that it would be appropriate for the commission to be taking a position on the feasibility study. Frankly, I think that that's a lot of money, and it could better go to the commission. So, just kidding, of course. But, you know, so there are a number of issues, and perhaps we would want, if there is interest on the part of the commissioners to potentially support this bill, if there are numerous changes to it, perhaps there could be a delegation to the staff to make those determinations as to whether those triggers are there or not. But I would not personally feel comfortable in supporting today the way the bill is now formulated.
Hi, Zach Morzini, and that certainly isn't unprecedented. I'm happy to work with Common Cause in the League on this bill, to continue to do so, now that they've brought us into the process. So.
And Madam Chair, can I respond to your concern about the FSR, or feasibility study report? Sorry, I'm an acronym or
together with the money, together with some of the other wording issues.
That's right. On the feasibility study report, like I mentioned earlier, this is a request from the Secretary of State's office. This is money that is put aside specifically for the upgrade of Cal Access. This feasibility study report has to happen regardless of whether or not it's in this bill or if we just mandated a new system. It is a part of the procurement process that the state must follow, that is laid down through law. And so, right now, as I mentioned in my letter, the price tag for Cal Access is $15 to $20 million, which many people in the legislature, including myself, find kind of a ridiculous number. And even the Secretary of State has stepped back away from that number and said we do need an updated FSR to figure out what the new price tag is that the state is going to be buying this new system from. And so I understand the concern of spending these special funds on the FSR, but that is why we created the special fund is for this exact purpose.
Madam Chair, this is Zach Morzini. May I ask a question of Mr. Ung? What's the Secretary of State's position on that provision in your bill?
We are adding a couple of amendments at their request, and then we fully expect them to support by the middle of July.
Okay. That was it from me.
Madam Chair, Gavin Wasserman.
Yes, Commissioner Wasserman.
My question kind of goes in a different direction, or maybe a direction that we're trying to avoid going into, but why does this bill have a threshold dollar amount for training when it would seem that if we could do training, if we're going to bother to do training, we'd want to do it for everyone? I'm certainly the more experienced professionals would grumble to get this sort of training, but we had the same kind of grumbling in the legal profession, certainly with our MCLE. Now, why isn't this simply across the board? If you're going to be a treasurer, you get some sort of training.
Mr. Ung.
And that is definitely something that we are open to. If that is a suggestion of this commission, if you think that would best serve the enforcement of the Political Reform Act to ensure that treasurers all follow the rules and regulations, then we're absolutely open to that amendment.
And of course, under that circumstance, we would need to increase funding for the FPPC. Correct? Is that correct, staff?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and then therein lies I guess therein lies one of the biggest challenges because, charging. There would be questions about, I suppose, once you go back to look at the legislation about charging a fee for the training, which initially the fee was based on supporting a program for this $250,000 or whatever threshold versus not having a threshold, and the balance between how do we fund versus what is appropriate to put forward as a fee, or if there's another funding source. Pardon me. Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, of course, Mr. Ung.
I do want some clarification on whether it's $250,000 or no threshold at all, how that would increase the cost of an online training system. Does the curriculum change at $250,000 versus no threshold?
More users that we'd have to manage. Yeah.
I'm not the IT person, but that's a lot of users, a lot of hits to a website that would have to be maintained. So just off the top of my head, I mean, when you have more access and more users, you have more potential for necessity. And go ahead, Gary.
Mr.
This is Gary Winnick. I guess the only other thing is it seems like there might have to be a two-tier system then, because a lot of the smaller committees deal with very different issues than the major committees do. And I'm not saying it has to be explained in simpler language, but your average treasurer for a $2,000 school board race probably doesn't need, the full sub-vendor statewide campaign election reporting training. So there probably would have to be different types developed to be most effective.
Are there any other comments, questions? I would just say, and I know this is sort of unrelated, but if the legislature were willing to give us $500,000 for this purpose, personally, I would rather have $500,000 for the FPPC to have our own online filing system, which is something that is a really top priority, and we do not have funding for it. So, I mean, that's part of the struggle here. And we know that that system is important to the public and important for the purposes of the FPPC. But that's just my own venting on
Madam
this
Chair,
particular issue.
There's quite a long line at the legislature for $500,000, but we'll hold your spot for you. Absolutely.
Madam Chair, Zach Morzini again. I just wanted to, since we do have 3 new commissioners, treasurer training discussions came about after the Kindy Durkee scandal hit the papers, and our enforcement division uncovered it, and the FBI prosecuted it. Kindy Durkee was a very popular treasurer. That's when discussions started bubbling around about treasurer training. Kindy Durkee wasn't untrained. She was a criminal and is convicted as one. So from staff's perspective, treasurer training was not really that high of a priority and up on our radar. And I would agree with the chair. If we're going to take on a new program at the FPPC, treasurer training is not at the top of my list. But that's just staff's perspective.
If the motion is support if amended, and if the troublesome section is the treasurer training, as a sponsor or one of the co-sponsors, we can definitely look at this again with the author, and if we need to take it out or put it off, then we're open to that. I think having the FPPC in support of this important legislation is meaningful for us and the legislature, and we want to make sure that, again, we don't tumble into any programs that you're not prepared to take.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Ung. I have the distinct impression that there is not support for a motion to support this bill right now among my fellow commissioners, but I would encourage you to continue to work with staff, and I hope that we will have a conversation about this bill at our next meeting.
This is Zach Morzini again. We'll bring the bill back to you after the League and Common Cause and I all work together. We can certainly bring it back to the commission for a position. So,
Okay, is there a motion?
I think the League wanted to throw their name in.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I apologize. Please.
Gloria Chen, who again for the League. Obviously, Phil Ung has talked about the opportunity and the willingness of certainly Common Cause, and I'm sure the League to work with the staff and to work with the senator to make changes. We hope that for the bulk of the bill is what it is we're pushing forward, and so for reconsideration at perhaps a later date once the amendments have been made, because right now I believe it goes to the Assembly Elections Commission, so there no doubt will be a number of changes, and we can, I'm sure, work to advocate for some of the changes of the concerns that you've raised, and in which case, at that point later, I hope you will consider and be supportive of the measure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody else in the audience that would like to speak to this bill? Hearing none, is there a motion?
I will move to adopt the staff recommendation to remain neutral on the legislation as it reads and as presented today, with the expectation that this will be brought before us again for reconsideration at a later date.
Okay. Okay.
Commissioner Kasher?
Yes.
Commissioner Eskovitz?
Yes.
Commissioner Wasserman?
Yes.
Commissioner Wynn?
Yes.
Chair Rabel?
Yes. Okay.
Okay.
Next item.
Our next bill is SB 26. This bill would require slate mailer disclosures to be printed in black ink on a white background and appear on each side of the mailer where a candidate or ballot measure has paid to appear. Staff recommends a support position on this bill.
I move staff's recommendation on this bill.
Second.
Commissioner Kasher?
Yes.
Commissioner Eskovitz?
Yes.
Commissioner Wasserman?
Yes.
Commissioner Wynn?
Yes.
Chair Rabel?
Yes.
Okay, and our final bill is AB 1418. This bill would delete the requirement that campaign statements be open for public inspection on the Saturday preceding a statewide primary or general election at the Secretary of State and other county offices, and it makes other technical changes. Staff recommends a neutral position on this bill.
Are there any questions about this? Yes.
I just had one question, Suki. If these offices are closed, is there any other way to access that information? I mean, I understand that people have not really been taking advantage of it, but that's not to say that there wouldn't be some heated conversation at some point, and the public would want access to that information. If there's no other way to get access on a Saturday, I would be reluctant to, to be neutral on this bill.
Yeah, Linda has informed me that they're all online. Most of them are online.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there anybody in the audience that wishes to speak to this bill? Oh, any other commissioner? Is there a motion?
I move to adopt the staff recommendation to remain neutral on this bill.
I second that.
Commissioner Kasher,
Yes.
Commissioner Eskovitz,
Yes.
Commissioner Wasserman,
Yes.
Commissioner Wynn,
Yes.
Chair Ravel.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Ms. Brar. Is there any other, something to come before the committee? Yeah.
Well, I just wondered on SB 52 why the staff, I mean, it was a good, description of the bill, but why was there not a staff recommendation, and why are we not in a position to do something about that?
Well, one of the reasons is that this bill, there's still going to be undertaking significant amendments to this bill. So that's the main reason. And the second reason was it's a pretty comprehensive bill, and we thought it would be better discussed at the next meeting because of that. So.
Well, so the only question I have on that is by the next meeting, it will be August, and the legislature will be quickly winding down, and any comments that we might have on the bill would be not meaningful. I mean, there certainly were provisions in this bill that I liked, and even if we wrote a letter saying, we support the disclosure provisions without kind of wading into some of the more, procedural or administrative issues.
Commissioner Wynn, this is Zach Morzini again. If it's the will of the commission, the chair has the authority to act on behalf of the commission in between meetings. So she has that authority. If you all agree that legal staff can look into this along with technical assistance and enforcement, and if you trust our judgment with what is good for the FPPC in this bill, we can proceed that way without a formal vote of support or opposition or otherwise in the interim, being that there is no July meeting. That's always an option. And then if the commission disagrees ultimately with any letter that goes out, you can we can itemize that on an agenda in August, and you can slap the chair's hand.
Slap me around.
But the chair does have the authority. It's been expressly delegated to her to act on behalf of the commission in between meetings.
I just, as I read the description of this bill, it does have significant disclosure requirements, which we're in favor of. But I understand if it's a shifting landscape, we don't want to wade in and be on the wrong side. But I was just kind of, my first time through, I was surprised there wasn't a staff recommendation, and I didn't understand why.
Honestly, Commissioner Wynn, it's an extremely complicated and moving target. The chair and executive staff have met with both the representatives of the author's office as well as the sponsors of the DREAM Act, or is it the DREAM Act? Disclose Act, pardon me. Whatever. It's a moving target, honestly. I wouldn't know what to put in my staff recommendation as of right now because I don't really know if the status is the same, but we can continue to work on it because it is a large piece of legislation.
Yes, and let me just say, I mean, we have been working with the authors of this for 2 years.
Yeah.
And it has changed over time, and there have been, the previous commission had some concerns that were constitutional concerns with the bill. And since it has been changing, I mean, there was, and because of the additional cost to the commission is so great, and there's nothing that would provide us any money to absorb those costs, and there's not an obvious way for us to divert staff to be able to absorb it. We did not think that it would be, it was sort of the opportune time now for us to be weighing in on it. But certainly disclosure comes within our purposes, and that's something that we support if it's going to be something that we're going to be able to implement. So is that?
Well, you know, it has passed out of the first house, and, you know, from what I can tell, the FPPC has no, you know, position. I'm glad to hear there's kind of behind-the-scenes involvement, but it could pass out of the second house before we meet again, and we might have a program that we were not involved in fashioning. And so, you know, I completely understand where you are, and I'm glad to hear that we're involved, but sometimes I feel like we need to be a little bit more involved, because if we're not at the table, then things might just happen to us instead of with us. And, you know, with everybody operating in good faith, I believe that the authors are. But so anyway, that is my concern, and I'm glad to hear that staff will continue to monitor this and take a position if we need to.
If the commission's comfortable as a body with proceeding in the manner I described with staff and the chair coming up with a letter, obviously we can't have a serial meeting with the commissioners. So if you're comfortable with us looking at it and getting a formal position through a letter out there, which you can review, of course, and comment on it or revoke even at a later commission meeting if a majority of the body chooses to and change position. But if you'd like to get us on record, which I believe that's a good idea. I was honestly surprised that the bill made it this far, given all the comprehensive legislation that the commission is sponsoring, that this also at the same time, so I'm kind of frightened. But if the commission's comfortable with that, we'll proceed in that manner.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Is there anything else to come before the commission? If not, is there a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
I second that motion.
Commissioner Kasher?
Yes.
Commissioner Eskovitz?
Yes.
Commissioner Wasserman?
Yes.
Commissioner Wynn?
Yes.
Chair Ravel?
Yes. Thank you all for attending our meeting in San Jose. We really appreciate your participation and hope to see you in Sacramento or somewhere else in the state. Thank you. The
Thank you.
meeting is adjourned.